welcome to episode number 9 of Office Hours Hot for Teacher. What is Hot for Teacher, you may ask? Why is this episode number 9? Where was I for episodes 1 through 8? I can't answer that for you. I don't know where you were. Which is probably for the best, that I don't follow you around the internet keeping track of you. You're your own person. But I can tell you that Hot for Teacher is a write-in relationship advice show. It's a spin-off of Office Hours, which was a call-in tabletop role-playing game advice show, which will be making its return fairly quickly. But in the meantime, we're going to be talking about relationships. We're going to be talking about friendship and sex and love. There's some sex stuff in this episode, so, not like, a lot of sex stuff, but like a not zero amount of sex stuff. Some. So the questions that we got today come from, as with every other episode, come from the audience. They come from you. And you submit them at www.adam-koble.com/hot-for-teacher. Or you can just go to my website, click on the link, the Hot for Teacher link. And you submit your questions there. And these questions, they come to me via that site. I take a look through them. I make sure I have not already answered them. And then we edit them and talk about them and answer them, and that's the plan. Now, the reason why we edit these questions a little bit is because often they come to me quite long. You will give me a lot of context, which is good. I like context, but I don't necessarily want to verbatim read all of that context. So don't worry. If your question comes up and it's been shortened or truncated slightly, it's not because I don't want to include that part of it. It's because I am using that context to answer the question, but I just want to share a smaller version so that people can actually read, what's going on, because often people will miss the question. So let's get to it, shall we? Let's answer today's first question. The first question comes to us today from Hidetsugu. And Hidetsugu says, I'd like to talk about turning a romantic relationship into a platonic one. I recently, about a year, had a romantic relationship, fall to the 7-year itch. The 7-year itch is a mythological point at which relationships, traditionally romantic, sexual, monogamous couple pairings, get boring or frustrating or annoying, or you get over wanting to be with each other anymore. People call it that, but it doesn't always happen at that time. It happens differently depending on the relationship, obviously. But this is what Hidetsugu is talking about. A period in the relationship where the relationship kind of goes from smoldering flame to simmering stew, sometimes of resentment and frustration, where you become humans instead of just goony-eyed in love with each other. Anyway, we parted ways on good terms and have been occasionally trying to keep in touch. My problem is that whenever we hang out, it feels to me like a date. An early date, even. The ones you don't fully open up because you might come out as too intense or something. Which I find frustrating because the point of hanging out with long-term, close friends, including the ones you stopped having sex with, is to talk openly about each other's lives, dreams, expectations, and not be that hard, right? The point is that these relationships are not difficult. So, Hidetsugu, I want to start by talking about something. I think I promised that I would talk about this in an earlier episode. I want to talk about something that I feel really strongly about. And that's Plato. Not the material, but the philosopher. So fuck him. Fuck you, Plato. Fuck you and your platonic relationships, and screw the undue social influence the idea of a platonic relationship has on people. I hate the term. I hate the way people think about it. If you are not aware, maybe English is not your first language, or maybe you've never heard the phrase, a platonic relationship is a pure spiritual affection between persons who are potentially sexually interested in one another, but that relationship is uncomplicated by sexy feelings or romantic ones. It's this really weird, romanticized way to say, we don't have sex, or we don't want to be romantically attached to each other, even though we could, but we don't want to. A relationship that is a non-sexual, non-romantic affection between people is not a platonic relationship. It's a fucking friendship. That's what we call having friends. The thing that bugs me about platonic ideals of relationships is there's this kind of hypocritical counterbalance thing that goes along with the idea of a platonic relationship. And it's just as bullshit as the relationship escalator that we've talked about before. This idea that somehow a platonic relationship is simultaneously more pure because, hey, we could fuck, but we're too good for sex because our relationship, our friendship means so much to us. But also, it's not as valuable as a relationship that's also sexual and romantic. You know, these idea of like, well, I married my best friend. Like, the thing is, we associate Plato with this obsession with perfection, with things untainted by the earthly realm. His whole idea about the cave and about how reality is just shadows of a more perfect place shining on a metaphorical wall. It's more interesting if we're talking about philosophical idealism, but when we apply it to relationships, this idea that purely mental, non-sexual, non-romantic relationships are somehow special, that there is a platonic ideal, we get all these other ideas of what relationships are like or should be like. And I don't like platonic relationships as a concept. The term itself is a pet peeve, and I think what it describes is silly. So what I like to do is call relationships where two people who could potentially be attracted to each other but aren't, friendships. They're no more or less special than any other kind of relationship. And certainly, they aren't the reflection of a perfect mental realm of magical ideals. So fuck off with your Plato. So what are we left with when we demythologize our relationships? Right? What we have is this idea that every relationship that we're in is made up of emotional content and action, right? We think and we feel things about the people that we do things with. Sometimes those relationships contain things of varying levels of intimacy, like sharing our feelings, sharing our hopes and dreams, sharing our bodies, our beds, or wherever you weirdos like to do sex on. What defines a relationship is only the things that make it up. And sometimes we like to take the infinite menu of human interaction and bundle collections of activities and feelings and call those specific types of relationships, right? We may choose cohabitation. We may choose a legally binding ritual. We may choose sex, and we may choose romance, and bundle those together, and we call that marriage, right? The sex part isn't often an element of what we bundle together and call friendship. Ultimately, though, those collections of interactions and activities are just shorthand, right? Every relationship, even ones that we call the same thing, are different. One marriage can be very, very different from another, just as two friendships are very different. The only relationships that are all the same are the relationships that we haven't formed. The null state of not knowing a person before we meet them. And the reason why I bring this up is just to kind of limber up your brain a little bit, loosen it up and get it flexible around thinking about the way that we transition relationships from one state to another. It's a lot easier, I think, if you can think about a relationship changing fluidly than if you're forcing yourself to think about the transition from one specific taxonomy form to another, right? It's easier to pick from a buffet than to order an entirely new meal. And there's this incredibly painful, often, not always, this incredibly painful process that comes with breaking up, right? The cessation of a specific relationship form and the following stuff around moving to a new constrained relationship form. A lot of that is narrative baggage around how things were and how things are and how you expect or hope for things to be, right? And the reason that some of this stuff can be problematic is because if you're listening to or following a cultural narrative too intensely, it can overshadow or make more difficult the changes you actually want as a person. So what I'm saying here, well, let's talk about what you're saying first. So what I'm hearing is that there is some awkwardness or worry around things being too intense in your relationship. That intensity, emotional and intimate intensity, is reserved for this previous romantic relationship you were in. And the idea of moving intense, emotional, intimate stuff into the current relationship doesn't feel comfortable for you. Cessation of romantic intimacy, accompanied by the not having sex thing, means that you're struggling with being a good platonic ideal and not, a functional, organically existing human being. And so here's the thing about change. It almost never happens cleanly with sharp, well-defined edges. It's not the transition between one zone and another. It's the slow modification of emotional, mental interconnection and action. It is a smeary blur. It's a mess of feelings that we pick up and throw against the walls of our relationship to see what sticks. Relationship change is a Pollock, not a Mondrian. Trial and error and the willingness to commit to each other as people that you want to be in each other's lives, and that is important for change, even and especially when you're hurting from an absence, right? So here's a piece of advice, something that always feels important to me when you're going through relationship change. Give yourself space for things to be weird and awkward. Give yourself space to feel sad or angry or weird about each other, right? Don't force friendship right away. I think a lot of people want to do this. There's this idea of like, well, I don't want to sleep with you and I don't love you romantically anymore, but I really want to be friends. Can we be friends? And if you try to do that too quickly or too aggressively, you develop this residual relationship radiation that you're going to have to try to survive that might have better been dissipated by taking some time apart or just doing very specific, safe-feeling activities together, right? Changing a relationship is a big thing, and it requires support. Don't try to make it worse by forcing a specific kind of intimacy, or you might end up where you are now, feeling like that former relationship's ghost is haunting the new one that you're trying to build. You don't want to have a baby that's haunted by its dead grandparents, all right? That's not, no haunted babies around here, okay? I'm not going to tell you that there's some specific easy way to transfer intimacy so it just feels close. There's no table. There's no like, if romance converting to, we're not talking about Celsius and Kelvin here. There's no way to just make it feel close and safe right away because that's bullshit. That idea is total bullshit, right? What I can suggest is you see how you feel about having a conversation with this person about what you hope your relationship could be like. Talk to them about the kinds of things that you want to do. Talk about what feelings you hope to be able to share with this person. Take them on a trip to the relationship buffet and work together to pick out the things that you both want in the relationship. And then work on that stuff together and be willing to let your meal change as you return to the buffet over time, as your feelings and your needs change. Transition is a hard thing. It's illusory to pretend like every relationship isn't in constant microflux. You can never really have true stasis with another person, which is nice because it means that your feelings of awkwardness will pass as you become more comfortable, or they might not, right? You might realize that the only relationship that worked with this person was a relationship that contained romance and sex, and that's okay. You don't have to have a relationship. I know you want to, but you don't have to have a relationship with this person. If you can't have a comfortable talk about what you want your relationship to be with this person, even just generally, maybe you need to take some time apart. Let the old ways die before you start trying to forge something new. I always try to advise that people be gentle with one another and with themselves, to leave room to muck things up, but to do so with kindness, to be kind about these things, and to work together as much as possible. I want to encourage you to be clear and specific about what you hope for, and listen well when you're told the same. Invite that communication. Because once you can do that, once you can lay out, this is what I think I want from the relationship, what do you want? What do we have in common there? That's our relationship. You can work together to do the thing. And that's the most important bit, right? The thing to remember about transition, the thing to remember about changing a relationship is that intimacy is built. You construct it piece by piece as you go. It's not conjured wholesale, and it's not transmuted from something else. If you're willing to do that work and be upfront about it and talk to this person about the things you just said to me, you have an opportunity to build something here. But if you can't do that, I mean, hell, copy and paste the message you sent to me and send it to them and be like, hey, this is what I'm having trouble with. But give yourself time. Change is not easy. Even without Plato getting involved. Question number 2 was submitted anonymously, and I wasn't given any pronouns for this person, so I'm going to I will refer to them as they. Anonymous person, thank you for submitting your question. I suppose pun not intended. The question in question is, I fall on the submissive side of sexuality. Not extreme levels of submissiveness per se, but not a passing glance either. I was wondering your opinion on how to approach this in looking for a partner. Should I look explicitly for a dominant partner and work on the relationship in that manner, or find a partner in general and introduce that side when sexual proclivities come up, as they naturally might? I wonder if this sub is a sub. Or maybe just a follower. Either way, Anon, this is a good question, I think. I mean, otherwise I wouldn't be answering it if it was a bad one. I would probably just have moved on. When do we tell people about the sex stuff that we like? And I think there's two answers to this question, right? There's when we're invited to do so, and before we do that stuff. Like, I think there's a couple of approaches here, and it really varies depending on how you feel and how you operate around conversations about sex, for example. If you're the kind of person for whom talking about sex stuff, generally or specifically, is just a thing you are comfortable with, and you're in conversation with another person who also feels that way, it may just be a thing that comes up in conversation, right? As much as comes up conversations about the kinds of coffee you enjoy, or the sort of sports you like to watch, or your favorite video game, or what build you think is the strongest in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. It might just be a topic for the two of you. If you aren't comfortable with that, you're not the kind of person that talking about that stuff is possible, you generally don't feel comfortable sharing your sex stuff with another person unless you're in an intimate situation or an intimate connection with them, that's okay too. If you're the first sort of person, I don't know that this would be as much of a tricky situation for you. You're probably already talking to people about this stuff, right? The thing is here is that this isn't about being submissive. This question comes down to when and how should I share the kinds of sex stuff that I like with a person? It's not about specifically Anon's predilections towards sex. This is just about when do we share intimate sex-related information. And whatever that stuff that you want to share is, there can be a trap where you only feel comfortable talking about your sex preferences with someone once you are already in a form of intimacy with them, but it can be hard to become intimate with someone when you are feeling uncomfortable talking about your sex stuff with them. So you can get stuck in this loop. And I think if you go into things with a sex focus, you're going to have to either be really upfront and be like, hey, so I'm looking for someone that I'm sexually compatible with. Can we talk about the kinds of things that we're both into so that you're not wasting your own time or theirs when they say, oh shit, no, I'm not into that. Alternately, you're going to have to find someone you have chemistry with regardless. And then if the two of you have space and interest in the more specific kinky stuff you're into, then great. I'm personally super down with people being upfront and talking about their desires. I think that kind of forwardness is really nice for me personally, but it requires that people be brave about it. If you want to lead with sex-wise, I'm a submissive person, you need to know that it's going to put you in a position potentially where they're going to say, oh, sorry, not for me. And whatever else might have been going on there will be affected by that. What I mean is that it's important to know what you're looking for. If what you want is someone you can do sex with, by all means, put it out there up front, get ready to use that to weed out people that you will not have chemistry with. If you're looking for a relationship that contains more than just sex stuff, you can still put that out there in front, but don't use it as a litmus test. If it comes up and that's a conversation you and this person are having that's comfortable and it's fun, let it be a piece of information about you, like the food you like or your favorite movies or what you think about Eldritch Blast. Do not make it a go, no-go detail, or you are going to eliminate the possibility of having any other kind of relationship with that person. Like, for example, I often talk about the media that I love when I'm meeting someone. The things that we love often says things about us, and it gives me the opportunity for that lovely bonding experience where we say, watch a movie that I love, and then we watch a movie you love, and we talk about it together. I think that sex stuff and cinema can be similarly intimate. So I might be a bad example, but what I'm saying here is a deeper relationship might be about other stuff, even if you disagree about sex things. It depends on what you're looking for. For example, if I was hanging out with somebody who didn't like Akira, I might still be able... Okay, bad example. If you don't like Akira, get out of here. We're done. I'm just kidding. Let's say I really like ramen, which is true. I super do. I love it. But I'm spending time with someone who is a vegetarian. Now, we can still eat food together. I do not need only to consume ramen to live. There's other food we can enjoy together. Same goes for sex. You identify as a submissive-leaning person, but if you're looking for someone to share more than just a very specific kind of parts mashing or not with, it doesn't matter if you like exactly the same sex stuff. Maybe you have someone you really like and they want to try being dominant with someone, and that's a fun learning experience for the two of you. Maybe there's another type of sex stuff that you could do together if you have chemistry, but they're not into that specific kind of sex stuff. Maybe you can have a meaningful romantic or friendship-based relationship without sex ever being a thing at all. What I guess is salient here is the kind of relationship you're looking for. The more specific your intentions, the more specific and earlier you ought to put those out there. It doesn't sound to me like sub-dom stuff is 100% absolute deal breaker for you. So maybe work out what you're after and go at this problem from there. If you can find someone you feel safe and comfortable with, exploring stuff is going to be a lot easier. But you have to know what you want before there's any chance of getting it. Now, I want to point out here, because I don't know Anon's gender, but this whole thing, this whole when do I talk to a person about sex things, can be a very gendered experience, especially if the interaction is between a man and someone who is not a man. If you are a man, be aware that what might seem to you like a casual discussion about your sexuality and your sexual interests may, in fact, not be super comfortable for the not man part of that conversation. If you go into a first date and one of the first conversations that you have with the person that you're with is, hey, let's talk about kinky sex stuff, you need to think about whether you have adequately obtained consent to talk about that. It can be off-putting at the least, and it can be triggering or dangerous or difficult for their mental health at the worst. Just men in the audience who are interested in talking about sex stuff, be aware that you have a responsibility. Everyone has a responsibility towards consent. Everyone, no matter their gender, but men especially have an institutional power that can put women in a position to be feeling like they are forced to listen to a man talk about sexuality when they are not comfortable doing so. So just keep that in mind. Now, Anon, I don't know your gender, so I'm not talking to you. This is just something that occurred to me while I was thinking about this question. So yeah, okay? Okay. Our third question today comes from Maddie. And she asks, there is a guy I really want to get to know better and become friends with, but I'm not sure how. I'm not really good with social interactions. Fair. I think many of us are not. Or talking to new people, but he seems really nice and like a good person to talk to. But I'm not sure how to start the friendship. I've been trying to message him, but he takes a couple of hours to respond and then only texts for about 20 minutes before he disappears again. I don't know how to be able to become better friends because I don't want to overwhelm him with messages, but at the same time, if I don't text him, we would never become friends. I think hanging out in person would help, but I'm super shy and don't know how to ask to hang out or what we would do. Now, when I was reading this, I was like, Maddie, why are you subtweeting me on this? I'm just because I don't respond doesn't mean I don't want to talk to you. I personally feel both sides of this question. I think that it can be really difficult to build a friendship from the ground up because there's a lot of uncertainty that can happen there. And let me start by saying clearly here that I'm pro text, right? I think that you can have an entirely meaningful, significant relationship purely via text. I think you can have a relationship with someone that never involves voice or face or in-person time at all. I think that's totally possible. I find a long series of emails. I find regular text messaging really nice. And with the right person, you can develop intimacy by that method. I think this question isn't going to be served by assessing the mode by which you're developing your friendship, Maddie, but by frequency and cadence, right? I think there's a fear, especially in developing relationships, of being too much or doing too much. A lot of people that I know struggle with a feeling of like being hyper aware of expended effort. So many people seem to struggle with not wanting to overwhelm their friends or potential friends with too much communication or too much effort. The same people feel frustrated or put out because the people they're friends with don't seem to be putting in the same amount of effort, right? They don't seem to be calling or texting as much or inviting them to things. I think the problem can be that if you want something, you have to be willing to ask for it or push for it when it comes down to it. I get that nobody wants to seem annoying, but also like we have to respect that folks will have boundaries and express them if they need to. Now, I know, as an aside, I know this is kind of wishful thinking, and that often, especially in text-heavy venues, people's boundaries are inelegantly delivered and inexplicitly delivered, and often come in the form of silence, which is horseshit, right? Do not ever express your boundaries, if you can help it, with silence. I hate when people do that, but it's the reality of things a lot of the time, and I know. But we have to trust people to have explicit boundaries. At some point in all relationships, someone is putting in more effort than someone else. The ideal that we are equally distributing effort, that each person is committing the same or comparable type of amount and energy, and the resulting thing is this comfortable, equitable relationship is sort of, it's a lie. Right? We've talked a little bit before about relationship Marxism and relationship communism. There's this idea of everyone should always be committing the exact same amount of energy, right? Persons A, B, C, and D all have to give 25% of the energy so that we can have a 100% functional group relationship. Versus relationship Marxism, which in my mind is the idea of I'm going to give 70% of the energy and you're going to give 30, and that's okay because we still end at 100%. It's equity and equality, right? Mutual support of one another is important, but it's not about providing exactly the same equality of time and energy. Even in fully established friendships that exist over long periods of time, in my experience, there's always someone putting a little bit more energy in. Now, this isn't a negative thing. It's just an observation of the way that things seem to go. There's always someone who's the one who remembers to text, someone who sends that email, someone who checks in, someone who makes plans, someone who does the inviting. That someone else might not be the same as you, someone might have more or less energy to engage the social engine, might be a little off-putting. Now, this can be an intentional thing, right? We can call attention to it. We can discuss it. We can engage with it as part of our friendship and say, hey, I notice this is happening. But that sort of thing can feel tricky at first. When we don't know someone very well and we don't feel comfortable asking, hey, so how much attention can you give and in what format can you give it? Now, I think that something that might help in your case, specifically, Maddie, is taking your relationship from an asynchronous mode into a synchronous one. What I mean here is that you're in this space that, for me, personally, I find really nice. Async relationship stuff can be really helpful, right? Sending letters, writing emails, text messages. It's a really good way to engage a person who is too busy to sit down for an hour straight and talk to you. I might not have time that matches the quantity, quality, or timing of the time other people have. But that can be hard when you're feeling a disconnect. I think that intimacy can be really hard to build asynchronously. It can be nice to maintain it, but I think that there's real value in the here and now. I think that that can take a bunch of different forms, but if you're in the same place, having a concrete plan to offer, that can be helpful. It's nice to spend some time with a person you're curious about, right? The thing about being in person, or an online simulacra thereof, is that the pressure doesn't feel so 100% in either direction. Conversations in synchronous space can be a bit more organic and a little less, I feel uncomfortable because I sent you 4 text messages and you sent me 1. And I know that it's scary, but I think the more specific your offer of synchronous communication time, the easier it's going to be to plan something together. Instead of doing something that feels risky and has a potential for lack of engagement, think of a specific plan. Instead of, hey, you want to hang out sometime? Try saying, hey, want to go see a movie with me tomorrow? Or, hey, I want to go eat tacos. Do you want to eat tacos with me on Saturday? Then you can adjust the details, but you've got that Mad Lib of social interaction built already, right? You might end up eating a different food on a different day or going to an art gallery instead of a movie, but you've set up a specific situation, and a detailed plan that is unignorable, right? I think specificity in planning with someone is really important. It can be really easy to just be like, I don't know, let's just do whatever you want to do whenever you feel like doing it. But if you're the one instigating things, you have the control and the power to make a specific offer of social engagement. Plus, you get to pick the fun thing you're going to do. And that's super cool. When you're done with this synchronous interaction, you can ask this person to take the reins. You can say, well, that was fun. Let's hang out again. Can you think of something that you want to do and let me know in the next few days? Then, since you asked for a specific thing, they can decide if they actually want to be friends with you and do the thing that you asked, or they'll say, I'm really busy right now, but it was nice for me that you suggested a thing. I'd love to do something again. Could you pick another activity? And if you are willing to do that, that might be how the relationship goes. They might say, hey, want to go to the movies? Hey, want to go see an art show? Hey, want to go listen to a band? Hey, want to come over and watch Stranger Things? Or they might just say, I don't know. I can't, I'm not in a position to offer those things, but I like it when you offer, right? You will develop whatever feels right for the two of you in your relationship. Again, negotiating this stuff specifically and explicitly can feel super weird. Because the prevailing narrative is that we just don't talk about things. The idea that any relationship at all just develops by accident is so fucked up. We put in work. That work is not always the same kind or amount, but we put in work and we do it together. So whatever form your relationship takes, my suggestion here is that your first step is you aim for something synchronous and specific. And when you're comfortable, request reciprocity. You can ask about having someone put in more energy if that's something you need. Some people don't mind being the one who plans things and decide when activities will happen. Some folks don't mind being the one who texts at a 4-to-1 ratio. But if it's making you feel weird, say so. Asking for what you need isn't being overwhelming. It's being real with a person. And if they're cool, they'll appreciate you being real with them. If someone can't handle you saying, hey, I could use some more interaction in this specific way, that comfort that you can build there is the kind of friendship that you want, right? If they can't do that, fuck them. They're not as cool as you think. But give it space to develop. So those are our questions for today. Our 3 questions from Maddie and Anon and from Hidetsugu. Thank you so much for submitting your questions. If you have questions for me that you would like me to answer on Hot for Teacher, go ahead and go to www.adam-koble.com. Click on that Hot for Teacher link and submit your question. We're going to do one more episode of Hot for Teacher next week. Then we're going to switch back and forth between Hot for Teacher and the advice for Game Masters. We're going to go back and forth between Office Hours and Hot for Teacher. So if you've been waiting impatiently, as I know some of you have, for me to get to some more GMing questions, they'll come back in a couple of weeks. But yeah, so we'll see you next time for more Hot for Teacher on episode number 10. Thanks for coming, everybody.